What's up, friends? It's been a bit since I've done this, and I felt bad, so I wanted to come hang out with you. And I figured we would talk about the ecclesiastical New Year, the church New Year, and how that came to be, in similarities and dissimilarities across traditions. And then I figured, as we focus on the beauty of the liturgical cycle, which is one of the greatest gifts God has ever given to us, we will also discuss how we can tie that into a greater life of service and what that might look like based on a particular tradition in the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. So, get into it, I guess. I had forgotten this was happening until today. One of my coworkers, who is Antiochian Orthodox, said to me, "Happy New Year." To which I replied, "It is not New Year." But I didn't think about it in terms of church New Year. I just thought, well, obviously it's not New Year, but September 1st is the church New Year in the Byzantine traditions. So, like all the Slavic traditions, the Greek tradition, this is their feast of the New Year. But in the Coptic tradition, of which I am a part, we do not celebrate that feast, also known as the Feast of Nairuz, until the 14th, which is 13 days later, which for some reason it just occurred to me today is exactly the same as what the old calendar Orthodox churches in the Byzantine tradition keep. So when I was in the Serbian Orthodox Church, we would celebrate this same thing, the Church New Year, on September 14th. An interesting part, though, is that I had learned in the last couple of years, spending time in the Coptic tradition, that this feast came to be because the calendar came to be in a way to start marking time in a Christian manner. And the day chosen to begin the calendar was the beginning, if I'm not mistaken, of the reign of Emperor Diocletian, who persecuted the ever-loving life out of the church, just martyrs upon martyrs upon martyrs. And the Alexandrian tradition is no stranger to martyrdom. Obviously, there are just millions upon millions of martyrs in the Coptic Church. And it's not necessarily, I don't know if I would call it a point of pride, but it's definitely like a claim to fame for the Coptic Church, is the Church of the Martyrs. And so that's the beginning of the Feast of Nairuz, the Church New Year. And there's an interesting tradition around it that I don't entirely understand yet. I'm still learning and trying to figure this out, which is that we eat unripened dates. They're like still yellow and on the vine, and we get them. And I don't know, kind of cool. I love those sort of things. I love home traditions and little things that draw you into the feast, aside from just going to church, and typically centers around food. Beautiful things like that. That's probably one of the things that I miss the most about like the Russian tradition, is like on the Dormition, they bless flowers. On the feast of the Transfiguration, you bless fruits, grapes in particular, different things like that. Honey, I think, on the Feast of the Cross, if I'm not mistaken. Which actually recently I found out that the Armenian church does a lot of similar things, which kind of makes sense, being that it like borders Russia, if I'm not mistaken. Armenia does. And there's a lot of like blessing of the incense, blessing of the flag, blessing of herbs, blessing of different things. So it's kind of interesting to see the way that like geography ties together different traditions, where there's like these similarities the closer you are to sharing a border. But I have even heard that there's a lot of these things in the Coptic Church that have just been lost in the diaspora coming to America. People have just kind of forgotten them, or maybe they weren't able to celebrate them completely, kind of under the persecution of Islam in Egypt. But I'm sure I'll learn more about that as time goes on. I would love to revive those sort of things. But anywho, so I'm curious, I don't have an answer to it, but I'm just curious if that tradition of the calendar beginning with the reign of Emperor Diocletian and martyrdom it was a shared thing. If that's a reason why the Byzantine ecclesial New Year starts when it does, because in the Julian calendar it'd be September 14th, which is the same as the Coptic calendar, which is like its own thing that I will get into in just a moment. And then when it was transferred to the Gregorian calendar in the new calendar, it was moved to September 1st. So if it's all shared around the same thing, I would imagine that the reasoning is the same, which makes sense. And ultimately, I think when it comes to church unity, and someone had recently even said to me, like, let's not talk about unity. Like, the idea of unity has become, I mean, it's still something we should strive for, but just the word unity has become like this buzzword that often is equated to like indifference and just forgetting about all the things that divide us, largely which theological or political or other or ecclesiological or otherwise, and seems to be affiliated with maybe more very hard left ideologies. And it's like, let's just focus on communion. Jake, aka Banana Jake, aka, I don't know if you prefer to be called that, but I'm pretty sure that those are bananas in your profile pic, and I will always call you Banana Jake now. But it is really good to see you, man. It's been a while, huh? Good evening. Communion. What are things that drive us to communion? I think one of them inevitably is persecution and martyrdom. Like, that was a big part of the early churches, the life of the early church, when they lived in an apostolic age, or even like a pre-Christian age, in one sense, because it was before kind of the legalization of Christianity or the co-opting of Christianity to be an imperial religion. It was when the church thrived, probably the most, some would say. And I've read some things that say we're moving back into not so much a post-Christian age, as a lot of people referred to it as, but more of a pre-Christian age, where it's much more apostolic in the way that persecution is picking up, and Christianity is becoming, or is, the most persecuted religion around. And we're gaining a lot of martyrs now in a similar way. And I think it's Peter Kreeft who said this. He's a Catholic philosopher and author, who said, when a madman is at the door, feuding brothers reconcile. And it's like, is this what it's going to take for us to establish communion? And there's some interesting things surrounding martyrs, like the 21 Coptic martyrs of Libya, and that they are now canonized saints in the Roman Catholic Church. These 21 men, 20 of which were Coptic Orthodox, if I understand correctly. The 21st was a Ghanaian man who just like was so moved by the faith of these Coptic workers that he became a Coptic Orthodox Christian, or said, "Your God is my God," and basically accepted the beheading at the hands of ISIS, just like the rest of them did. Who died outside of communion with the Catholic Church, or canonized saints in the Catholic Church, recognizing that they are in heaven and interceding for us. Or like St. Gregory of Narek, who is a huge spiritual giant in the Armenian tradition, is also a doctor of the church in the Roman Catholic Church. So, these are the sort of things that transcend a lot of the issues that we find across the board. And is this the means to communion, even if it's a spiritual communion in the age to come, where we recognize that as it exists, rather than trying to force something here and now? Which, I don't know, I'd be interested in your thoughts on that, because there was even some debacle. I think it was Father Lazarus, Abuna Lazarus, who's appeared on the Orthodox Spirit podcast a good bit recently. I think the Mike who produces that podcast goes to his parish, was even sort of speaking against, I am pretty sure it was Jay Dyer on X, talking about how the 21 weren't real saints, or weren't real martyrs, or something like that. I don't know. They were fake, some terrible thing that nobody should say. But obviously there's always going to be that voice of dissension. But anyway, so New Year, based on the beginning of hard persecution and martyrdom with Emperor Diocletian. Martyrdom, and then like, how does this all fit into the greater liturgical year? It's interesting that the Coptic calendar is so wildly different than every other calendar. Like, coming into this world, I was used to, there's the Julian calendar, there's the revised Julian calendar, and there's the Gregorian calendar. And some people reject the Gregorian calendar outright because it's a papal calendar, because the Pope of Rome kind of like instituted this across the board, which it is the more scientifically accurate calendar. And then you have the old calendar, the Julian calendar, which is like the traditional calendar, the calendar that the Orthodox Church uses. Even when they say the revised Julian calendar, that's the point, is that it's still the Orthodox calendar, which it follows the Orthodox, Eastern Orthodox, capital O, just capital O Orthodox, Eastern and Oriental methodology for calculating Pascha, for calculating Easter. So even if an Orthodox church is a new calendar Orthodox church, it will still follow the Paschal cycle and Lent the same as the rest of the Orthodox churches do. And there's even some Byzantine Catholic churches that still follow that. So like, I know St. Elias that I've talked about in other places, Ukrainian Catholic Church in Brampton, Canada, Ontario, follows a revised Julian calendar. So just like the rest of its Orthodox sister churches, saying that will probably get me in a lot of trouble, but this church is very Orthodox. I don't care what anybody has to say. Celebrates or follows along the Lenten journey with the rest of the Orthodox world, and same as would be true of the Oriental churches. I was only familiar with that, Gregorian and Julian, and that whole debate, and the true or genuine Orthodox movements or sects or whatever you want to call them, that highly condemn new calendarism as a heresy, or being a part of a greater pan heresy of ecumenism. It's been a while since I've uttered those words out of my mouth, and it just feels as gross to say it as it did then. But then I come into the Coptic world and discover, no, let's just make it a little more complicated for you. Not only do we use a completely different calendar that was based on agrarian practices of ancient Egypt and the flooding of the Nile, but we have 13 months. We have 12 months of 30 days, and then a 13th little month of 5 or 6 days, depending on, if it's a leap year or not, which I suppose also alters the Feast of Nowruz, the ecclesial New Year, which could fall on, if I'm not mistaken, either September 11th or the 14th. Why it's a 3-day difference, I guess it has something to do with the fact that the rest of the days are equally 30 days. But having equal 30-day months makes some really beautiful things happen, which is where I'm heading with all of this. So if you just stick with me, I promise I'm going to get to it. There's the genuine beauty of the liturgical cycle of the year, right? We kind of follow along, and it's been described to me by my good friend Deacon Nicholas Kotar, who's a Russian Orthodox deacon, that time, and I don't know if this is an idea that's original to him or not. Most people think of time as either being this linear function or a cyclical function. And he's like, well, it can be both. And that as we move forward towards the eschaton, as we move forward towards the second coming of Christ, the end of all things, right? The great renewal in the new heavens and the new earth. We're moving through these mini cycles of the liturgical year along this line all the way to the end. So it's like one continuous motion towards that, but also entering into and remembering and living and recalling these events in the life of Christ, his mother, and the saints. So this is why we celebrate Christmas or the Feast of the Nativity every year. It's why we go through Lent every year. It's why we celebrate the ecclesial New Year every year. It's why we celebrate Pascha, Holy Week, Feast of the Resurrection every single year. And Jake says, still don't understand the calendar. I just nod when Abuna mentions it. I'm kind of in the same boat, man. Like I don't have the names of all of the months memorized or anything like that. But one thing that I have learned is because it's so evenly divided into these 12 30-day months, something really interesting happens is that in the Alexandrian tradition, or I guess as I'm name dropping all kinds of people here, and maybe that's yucky, I don't know, but obviously friend of mine, friend of the channel, Deacon Enoch from the Ethiopian church has talked about what was I about to say? Crap, I lost my train of thought. In any case, these 30-day months, instead of the Alexandrian tradition, the Afro-Asiatic tradition creates these repeating monthly feasts that happen. And there's two that I know of for certain, and there might be more that I just don't know about, but I know the one is the monthly feast of the Archangel St. Michael, and then there's the monthly feast of the Mother of God, St. Mary. And I think these are really beautiful things to keep a monthly feast already, to just kind of enter into these particular personalities of these saints, of St. Mary and of St. Michael the Archangel. There's some women in my church that make this particular bread, fatir something, and it's a bread kind of in honor of St. Michael the Archangel. And my understanding is, at least for one of these women, and I think this is a common thing, is that you kind of petition God through the intercession of St. Michael for a particular thing. A lot of these women are mothers and they're praying for their children. And if the prayer is answered, you kind of, in honor of the saint, will make this bread and distribute it to people in the name of this saint. So pretty much every single Sunday, this woman brings in these massive bags full of these little St. Michael breads, these little buns, sweet buns, basically, and has a handful of the deacons in the church go hand them out to everybody. And it's a really beautiful tradition and actually really sweet. And it's like the kids love it and it's amazing. And being able to use that to explain the liturgical cycle to your children, to be like, why does she hand these buns out? It's just something to talk about. But there was something when I interviewed Deacon Enoch years ago that I have thought about ever since, where he described this thing called a cup fellowship. And this was what I really wanted to get into, is like, how can we maybe share an idea here of a way that we can do more than just think about things or think about intellectual ideas or how cool like the liturgical cycle is, and tie something for which we know we will be judged, which is everything in Matthew 25. Have you fed the hungry? Have you clothed the naked? Have you visited the sick and the imprisoned? And all of these things. He says when he comes to separate the sheep from the goats, these are the criteria. Doesn't say anything about theology, doesn't say anything about dogma. Of course that's important. Of course, like, that's understood, that like right belief matters and right belief should lead to right action. But right action can also lead to right belief, I think. Feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. So like my church, for example, is called St. Mary. There's a monthly feast of St. Mary. So why not on the feast of St. Mary, we engage in what Deacon Enoch described as a cup fellowship. And a cup fellowship is this, I guess in Ethiopia, which interestingly enough is the same as Serbia, which is another, I mean, they're not geographically that close to one another, but there's some shared tradition that can be bonded over there. It's not common for individuals to have a patron saint. Rather, maybe a whole village will share a patron saint, or a whole city, or, people will go under the patronage or the intercession of the saint of their parish, which inevitably is kind of, the parish is the center of the town, because there's still kind of that classical city planning or architecture surrounding that. So what they do is on the feast of that particular saint, they will gather for the liturgy or shared prayers together. They will enjoy a meal with one another and some time of fellowship. And then they will serve the poor in their community in the name of that saint. So there's the Serbian tradition there that is like analogous to it is called the Slava. So in the Serbian tradition, like pagan Serbia, everybody had a household god. And that household god was basically just passed down the line in families. So when Serbia was baptized, this was such a dear tradition to them, they Christianized it and said, you will be baptized and your family will go under the patronage of a particular saint. And that follows the lineage of the male of the family for generations. So like, again, spending time in the Serbian church, it's like it's called their slava, which means glory. So their glory day would be tied to typically St. John the Baptist or St. Nicholas or St. Sava or St. George or Archangel Michael. Those were pretty much like the big five that everybody had. And they could count that like, hey, this goes all the way back to, I don't know, the 900s when like Serbia became Christian. So for 15, 20, 50 generations, whatever it is, our families have been keeping this slava. So on that saint's feast day, they bring a special bread and they like, it's blessed in the church and you take it home. And there's this special wheat. I think it's still called koliva. And people come in, they greet you, Srečna Slava, and like there's a massive feast and you give gifts, and it's actually this very beautiful thing, like in honor of celebrating this saint's protecting intercession over the family for all of these years. So could we tie it all together, right? So for example, again, my parish, St. Mary's, could I get a group of people together and on the monthly feast of St. Mary, could we go to church for the liturgy or ask Abuna to offer a liturgy that day if he doesn't already, if it doesn't happen to fall on a particular day, and then stay, enjoy a shared meal in the fellowship hall afterwards, make sure we make more than enough, and then take it all out into the neighborhood, find the people sleeping in the parks or in the streets, and just hand out blessed bread or bon or like some of this food to people. Or better yet, go and invite people to church and to the meal before you start any of it. Come join us, come sit with us, come have a meal with us, and understand that like St. Mary's praying for all of this, interceding for all of this in heaven for us. So that's just an idea that I have that I think would be worth sharing. And I think this sort of transcends maybe communion lines or lines that we've created between communions. Like this is something that I think Catholics can and should do. And this is something that I think Eastern Orthodox can and should do. And it's definitely something Oriental Orthodox can and should do, because as far as I understand, at least between the Coptic and the Ethiopian tradition, the calendar functions the same and that there's this monthly feast. I don't know if that's the same in like the Syriac or the Indian or Armenian traditions, but if it is, that could be a really cool thing. Like if your city happens to have an Ethiopian and a Coptic church and you don't do a lot of things together, like here's a great place and a great time to have a pan-Orthodox liturgy offered, with the clergy sharing the altar and then the people gathering to share some of the different maybe musical traditions, which was a beautiful thing that I saw in the liturgy that happened again at Abuna Lazarus's church in California. And then just serve the people around you. Like I think we silo those things too much, where we think this idea of serving people is an accessory to liturgy. And it's like, if we really enter into the liturgical cycle and its fullest expression, the two should happen simultaneously. And it's a beautiful thing to invite people into. Come and see the liturgy, come and see the church. Enjoy this meal with us, Or, I don't know, another idea would be feed people before liturgy starts, because chances are the people you're inviting to the liturgy are probably not already baptized Orthodox Christians. They're not going to be partaking of communion. So while you're fasting in preparation for communion, what a better way to pray than to serve people and give them a full belly so that they have ears to hear the beauty of the prayers of the liturgy, and then have them come have seconds with you afterwards as you enjoy a feast. Kind of short and sweet. That's really all I had to talk about. So as always, I'll give it a moment or two. to see if there's any thoughts or questions. Jake, I appreciate you hanging out, man. See if you have any other thoughts on this, or if this is something you were even familiar with in your parish. I know you said still don't understand the calendar, but were you familiar enough with kind of the monthly recurring feasts? Is this something that's like celebrated in your parish? Which I can't even remember, maybe like what general area you're in. I'm not asking you to dox yourself or anything, but maybe just something to think about. While I give you a minute to type, I'm going to reply to my wife so she doesn't think that I am dead, because I'm not. Clearly. Just doing a stream. So leave me alone. Just kidding. The AI 200. Hi, friend. Welcome to the party. I don't think we've met before. I'm Derek. Hi, I was just wondering how you got introduced to the Coptic Church. Fantastic question. So, I've talked about this in other places, but I have a relatively long and convoluted spiritual journey. But I was part of the Eastern Orthodox Communion. I was received into the OCA, but ended up primarily in the Serbian Archdiocese of North America. And I think it's of North America, of East. No, that's wrong. Sorry, of Eastern America. Whatever. I was in the Serbian Orthodox Church, and I was working for the company that I work for now, which is primarily an Eastern Orthodox service organization. And I was tasked with connecting or getting Orthodox churches in my area to come together to work towards serving the poor in our area. So I had visited, the Ukrainian church, the Carpatho-Russian church, all the OCA churches, all this. And I had asked, has anybody visited the Coptic church? And across the board, everybody said, like, no, we haven't. And I could tell there was like a little bit of the whole, oh, they're non-Chalcedonian, or they're Oriental Orthodox. Like, And I thought, well, they're Orthodox, and I know that Coptic churches are serving in our centers in other places. So I'm going to go try to make some connections there. So it was actually really funny. The first time I tried to go to my Coptic Orthodox church, I emailed the priest and I asked if I can come to Vespers, because I was like, oh, it's most similar to the old calendar. Funny that we're talking about calendars. And he said to me, yes, we start from 6 to 7:30. And I thought, we start from 6 to 7:30. Clearly, English is not his first language. I'm not sure what that means. Like, does that mean we might start at any time between that, or we start at 6 and we end at 7:30, or what? So I showed up at 6 and I pulled in front of the building where the front door is, not knowing that nobody uses that front door, and it is pretty much always locked. But rather, people use a storm door next to a garage in the back alley between the church and the rest of the businesses in the area. So I got out of my car at 6 and I went to open the door, and it was locked. And I thought, well, maybe they're running late. And then I got back in my car, and every 15 minutes I would get out and try to go into the church, and it was locked. And then at about 7 o'clock, I left. I later found out I was going to the wrong door. So as I'm trying to connect all these churches, and I decided to go make a connection at the Coptic church, I started going to liturgy on Wednesdays. And first and foremost, I fell in love with the liturgy. Like, I love the Byzantine liturgy too, but it's very rigorous, very kind of militaristic in a way, very choreographed. And this felt like children just crying out to their father. It felt so of the people, like folky. I don't know how to describe it other than that. And the people were just beautiful, like so inviting and hospitable. And at the time, like, I was struggling to really kind of make a home in the Serbian church. Had kind of, I don't want to call it a failed attempt at making a home in the OCA. My wife and children weren't Orthodox. They weren't interested in it. And as I continued to visit this Coptic church, I just fell more in love with it and started studying, like, is there really a difference in the Christology here? Ultimately came to the conclusion that there is not, and our bishops seem to agree. However, I do think that the Alexandrian expression is a little more clear. And I was sold on that, and my wife and children ended up falling in love with the church. So we all kind of officially made the move into the Coptic Orthodox Church. more than you asked for, but that's how we got introduced to the Coptic Church. Are you Coptic Orthodox? I'm curious. What else? What else you want to talk about? What else you want to ask or accuse me of? And that was too aggressive. I'm sorry. Please forgive me. But for real, you can say whatever you want. So, so your family liked the Coptic Orthodox Church more? Yes, I would say generally speaking. And it wasn't necessarily about maybe certain, how do I describe this? It wasn't primarily a theological exercise for the rest of my family. And really, neither was it for me. It was more of the fruit we saw in the life of the church and the spirituality of the church was so appealing. Like, I can't express that enough. And I'm not trying to judge the Eastern Orthodox communion in this, because obviously that is a equally beautiful spirituality in a lot of different ways. But there's just so much humility and deep spirituality in the Coptic Church. And it is just like thriving. A lot of people don't even know it's there, but it is thriving, and it is keeping its youth in the church. And the people are so pure in heart. Maybe I'm still looking at it with rose-colored glasses because it's, I mean, I don't know, relatively new to us in the scheme of things, but I wasn't. I think now I've been, maybe not officially, but like in terms of time spent, I've probably put equal amount of time in at the Coptic Church as I had in the other Orthodox worlds. And it's just different. There's such a vibrant life. I think it has a lot to do with persecution and martyrdom, the fact that the church was never given the benefits of being an imperial church, or at least not for very long, given that the split happened in 451 and Christianity was kind of legalized in the 300s. So maybe 100 to 150 years of being a part of that before it really turned into a full empire, or whatever you want to say. I think there's benefits to that for sure. Yes, I'm Coptic. I was born into it, but I'm super curious how converts see it. Yeah, in my parish, my family is the only all convert family currently. There's some people that converted to marry in, and some of them, to varying degrees, have also fallen in love with it and really taken it seriously as their own church. Some people are just kind of along for the ride, but they're still faithful. We're actually getting ready to start a class in our parish, if you would pray for it. Just like we're calling it Orthodoxy 101. And there's just a handful of other people that have started showing up and asking questions. And Abuna's been like, I'm not sure what to do with this. It's never happened to him before. So he's asked me to help out. And we're going to just have a class based on a book from Father Antonius called This Great Mystery of Life. It's just kind of an intro to the Coptic Church. But the time that I've spent in Canada, when I was in Ottawa, Montreal, well, I didn't really go to any churches in Montreal. But in the Ottawa area, there's a decent amount of converts. And I know like Washington, D.C. has a good bit of converts, but our area is pretty rare right now. I think it's more of a blessing to never be an imperial church. Yeah, I agree. I agree completely. It does lead me to ask a lot of questions about what is the nature of the relationship between church and state. Like, there's something really beautiful about Catholic social teaching and kind of the Catholic Church's understanding of building something, right? Building a Catholic society, as it were. And there's a lot of answers to a lot of questions, like How should we think about money and economics and bioethics and all these sorts of things? And it's something that I'm increasingly interested in studying and reading about, because I think there's just a lot of like wisdom and beauty in that. These aren't developed, fleshed out answers that the Orthodox tradition, Byzantine or Alexandrian, Afro-Asiatic, whatever you want to say, has spent any amount of time really trying to flesh out, largely because of persecution. Both communions, Eastern Orthodox and Oriental Orthodox. You know, you have the Ottoman Empire and the Ottoman issues that came in there for the rest of the other Eastern churches. And then kind of after the Arab conquest and the issue of Islam for Alexandria and the Egyptian church. The Armenian church has gone through insane things. Syriac church, same thing. It's just been more of a, let's hold fast to the essence of the church and spirituality and just the life of prayer. So it's like, okay, do we try to transform the world, or do we try to just die to the world and focus wholly and completely on our citizenship in heaven, like what St. Paul says? I think I lean towards that, but we obviously have to exist in the world and function. So it's like, as much as I work a job and spend money and pay bills and raise children and teach them like how to function in society, I want to do that in a Christian manner. So it's nice to have those answers, but that was a tirade. I apologize. This is exciting. I'm really happy that you're here just to share this. I've learned, and like in my last stream that I did about like the pain of conversion and these sorts of things, that you know, it's easy to fall into the YouTube trap of like, oh, how many people are going to watch this, and you refresh the page afterwards, and you put effort into something and you want people to see it and you want to be helpful. But what I'm learning is that like God is putting the right people here. Like he's putting this in front of the right people. There were some beautiful comments on the last video of people coming from a Jewish background or a Muslim background who are coming to Christ and have said that like things that I've said either on my channel or other people's channels have been helpful to them. Glory to God. Like that's terrifying actually to think about. So pray for me, please, God, that I would be the man that I need to be to do any of these sorts of things. Because I'm certainly not. But it's just like whatever, if it's fruitful, if it's a few people and it's beneficial to the few people that watch it, thank God. I agree, says the AI 200. But I think having the power of an impersonal church or an imperial church, I think you mean, can tend to corruption. I agree. I think there's an incredible amount of temptation to that when it comes to it. You know, when it's like, okay, you're put in power or you're put in charge of something. I don't know. There's that whole absolute power corrupts absolutely, that sort of deal. And it's easy to baptize your militaristic or political motivations, I think, when you're in that sort of situation. So better to be underground, I suppose. This is good conversation. And we got here by talking about New Year's in September, calendar of the Martyrs, and tying our service into that calendar. All right, I think I've hit my sweet spot. Any final thoughts? If not, obviously it's always helpful if you like the video, if you subscribe, if you comment. I love comments. I love comments more than anything else because I get to interact with you more and good conversations come out of that. So please comment anything you want. Share it. That's always fantastic. That's wonderful. It's a great way to support these sorts of things. And it honestly just gives me the motivation to keep doing it because I know that it's fruitful for people. And then always people are welcome to come join the locals community. The link is in every description of every video that I make. I do weekly live streams over there. For the most part, on rare occasion, we might miss a week or something like that. But it is a very beautiful community of people. And it's actually pretty diverse as far as like church memberships are concerned. There's a lot of Catholics, a lot of Eastern Catholics, Eastern Orthodox, Coptic Orthodox. We have some fantastic conversations. We get together in person from time to time. So if you become a supporter over there, you get weekly live streams, you get an annual, God willing, meetup, and just a beautiful group of people to talk with and to pray with. So, what has been your favorite service to attend? I love Palm Sunday. Evlogimenos is like, I get jazzed. Like, that is one of my favorite hymns. And it's just so joyful. So I love Palm Sunday. I mean, how could you not love the Feast of the Resurrection, obviously? All of Pascha week is incredible. Holy Friday is amazing. But just kind of like, as far as the regular offerings are considered, I love an early morning liturgy before the sun comes up. Our parish for a while offered a Friday morning, like 6:30 a.m. liturgy. And I think it got to be just too much for Abuna. And so we haven't had it. Hopefully they bring it back for the fall or the winter. There's something about like receiving communion as the sun is rising and then going out into the world while everyone else is waking up. That is just, there's nothing better. So those are my favorites. All right. I'm going to shut her down. Thanks for hanging out. I appreciate everyone who watches this live and everyone who will watch it in the future. Again, like, subscribe, comment, share, come over to Locals. It'd be good to spend time with you. Peace.